Picture this. A family station wagon, kids strapped in like sardines, the vehicle bumping along a country road, trash and crumbs on the floor, music playing, and one of the children, channeling the voices and concerns of all children everywhere, utters the timeless, metaphysical question, "Are we there yet?" No matter how spacious the car, how pleasant the music, how delicious the munchies, how much love the travelers share, anxiety about the duration and direction of the journey is inevitable. We may leave childhood behind, but it always seems that we circle back to the "are we there yet" of life, as evidenced by the decades worth of maps stuffed in glove compartments, our universal fixation with that pulsing blue dot on our phones, and the general lack of patience that we all have for things that take time. Our Torah understands the uncertainty of being on the way somewhere as well. Our biblical ancestors, from Adam and Eve to the tribes of Israel and to Abraham in the wilderness, all of them spent most of their time between places. Traveling is the Torah's most prevalent motif. In fact, one could argue that our holy book, documenting the journeys of our ancestors through the wilderness, should really be entitled The Torah, ... Are we there yet? This reality invites the questions. How can it be that the foundational document of our religious tradition, the scroll that is the fabric of our relationship with God, is all about being on the way to somewhere, like those kids in the back seat? Why do we as a community preserve a text that tells the story of people never quite arriving at their destination? This is Judaism's narrative about profound religious experience. Unbelievable as it may seem, yes. The Torah spans years and generations, recording the lives of our ancestors, even though it may be romantic to think of these individuals as traversing the world in a God-inspired euphoria that only the most spiritual people enjoy. After all, God talks directly to them. This is not the case. The Torah does not record our ancestors walking around constantly inspired by God's presence. Quite the contrary. They make all sorts of mistakes and often feel alone, even lost, and many times perceive themselves as very far away from God. But just like those amazing little pit stops we accidentally discover on a long road trip, you know, the places with the best ice cream or the prettiest views, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob experienced God and spirituality at certain key places along the way. This can be a real spiritual reality check for us when we doubt our own spiritual health. Many do not think of ourselves as spiritual or having much of a relationship with God. As a rabbi, people share this with me often. But then I hear that they have found certain places in their lives where they did feel close to God, did find a sense of spirituality. And what we must remember is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would have said the same. Life is hard, they might say to us. The journey is long, and a lot of the time I feel confused and alone, so I just put one foot in front of the other. But every now and again, I experience something remarkable, and I feel that it might be God. Perhaps this is why one of God's many names in Judaism is Hamakom, meaning the place. Certain special God places along our path, just like those little finds we discover while traveling down 55 or along 40, can make our long, arduous journeys worthwhile and meaningful if we allow ourselves to see them. And once we've found them, we might want to consider going there on purpose. For Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, finding Hamakom, that God place, was a varied experience. A beautiful midrash, a rabbinic legend, talks about the journey of these three individuals and identifies the moment when they knew they were standing on holy ground and the route they took to get there. According to the rabbis, Abraham is the first human being to have a real spiritual relationship with God. For Abraham, the God place where this relationship is truly realized is on a mountain, namely Mount Moriah, from the Torah reading this morning. The nature of his journey toward God, therefore, is a climb. According to the rabbis, this is because Abraham perceives God as unreachable and majestic. Abraham's search for God takes him on a vertical journey, and he finds God on a very high place. Sometimes we experience the hamakom of Abraham. If we think about climbing a mountain and reaching the top, we feel that we may have experienced awe. That's the word that many people use. We, like Abraham, sometimes yearn for a sense of grandeur, a reminder of the enormity of things, an awareness that we are a part of something much more powerful than ourselves. Like infants who cry until they are swaddled, we sometimes need to be enveloped by a stronger force. We crave powerful music, majestic settings, prayers that elevate us to that high place. Even going to the mikveh, a pool of holy water into which one descends, is a vertical journey toward immersion in an all-encompassing presence of God. Abraham is the father of our people, and we are very influenced by his vision of hamakom, God, as being the pinnacle of a very long vertical journey. Isaac's place of spirituality differs from his father, Abraham's. Following the death of his mother, Sarah, moved by his yearning for companionship, Isaac wanders into a field at twilight and meditates, the Torah says. When his meditation is over, his prayers seem to be answered, for there stands Rebekah, his future wife. For Isaac, communion with God is found in a quiet place, in peace, in a moment when we venture out of the chaos of regular life. If Abraham's journey toward God is a vertical journey, Isaac's is horizontal, stretching outward into uncharted territory. In our loud, confusing world, hamakom of Isaac holds great promise for us. If we think about what it feels like to wander into a field where there is nothing but space in every direction, we might think of the word freedom. Deep breaths, wind and sky, room to be. We, like Isaac, often seek out the wide open spaces in life and find God and spirituality there. Sometimes we just need to get away. We need phones turned off and fences torn down and rules cast aside, and we need to be alone and without boundaries just for a moment. We need a chance to focus, whether we get that focus from running or yoga or meditation or cross-stitching or the silent prayer during a service. There, in the silence and the peace of the moment, we suddenly feel close to God. Jacob's most spiritual experience, unlike his father Abraham's, his father Isaac's, and his grandfather Abraham's, is described in great detail by the Torah. And unlike his predecessors, it is Jacob who gives a name to the place of spiritual encounter. After Jacob swindles his brother Esau, he must flee for his life. And on Jacob's first night after leaving his home and family, lonely and afraid, he falls asleep in the wilderness and has a dream. His dream is of a ladder on which angels go up and down, and God is there, right beside him. God, with all the calm reassurance of a loving parent or a dear friend, communicates the following to Jacob: I am with you. I will always protect you. I see that you are leaving home, but I will bring you back here one day. Jacob wakes up from his dream and says, surely God is in this place, and I did not know it. Then he announces with clarity and decisiveness, this is none other than Beit El, the house of God. This beautiful midrash presents a remarkable idea about these three people. It suggests that each of these places, Abraham's mountain, Isaac's field, and Jacob's house, is actually all the same place, experienced differently by each of them. The Midrash identifies that place as the future site for the temple in Jerusalem, and thus the prototype for all synagogues and temples to this day, including this one. And most profoundly relevant for us, the implicit message of this Midrash, of this teaching, is that each of our ancestors, and by extension then each of us, has a unique journey toward God and spirituality. If we are committed to it, the Midrash suggests, each of those unique journeys can intersect in one central location. The question, though, is, what is the landscape of that place? If Abraham's image of the mountain is so satisfying to so many, why isn't it the only kind of journey represented in the Torah? Why do Isaac and Jacob come along and see that place differently? Perhaps it is because there is also a risk in imagining a spiritual journey like Abraham's that's purely vertical. Our Bible alludes to it constantly. Adam and Eve stretch their arms up to pick the fruit off the tree, and that stretch upward is their downfall. In the story of the Tower of Babel, the people try to build a tower that reaches up to God, and the tower comes crashing down. Joseph stands so tall over his brothers and then descends into a pit and into prison completely alone. And Jonah, whose story we'll hear on Yom Kippur, receives a command akin to that of Abraham, but winds up in the belly of a whale, where he cries out of the depths for a God who is very far away. A vertical movement upward toward God on high also intimates that a vertical movement downward in life sends us further away from God. Life is full of mountains. We enjoy incredible vistas and gain perspectives we could never see on level ground. We seek out and even sometimes find powerful spiritual moments that we describe through the language of height, whether it's the transcendence upon witnessing the birth of a child or the resplendent peak of a glacier. But the peril is that if God is only up on the mountains, what do we do with the valleys and the trenches of life? What if we physically or mentally can't climb anymore? What if there are no mountains in our personal landscape? Even though these high holiday services are a nod to Abraham's worldview of God as high, and even though this sanctuary was built to elevate us to that level, we must remember that we will always be fighting gravity when we have to climb upward toward God. And what about Isaac's journey into that quiet space of meditation? Why isn't this the one and only route on the map? A spiritual journey with a horizontal course also has its challenges, and our Torah makes sure that we remember those as well. First of all, too much wandering can result in getting lost and feeling desperately lonely. Wide open spaces are wonderful, but they can also turn into a wilderness that we cannot get out of, just like the 40-year journey of our Israelite ancestors. Fear and frustration consumes them during these years. It even causes them to yearn for Egypt, which in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, a narrow place, the polar opposite of Isaac's wide open field, or the expansive wilderness of Sinai. And we encounter those places in the journey of our lives as well. Sometimes rules and walls just surround us. Sometimes life puts us in chains, whether of an actual prison, a prison of our own making when we bind ourselves to a life we don't want, or a prison that our body becomes when we're sick or hurting. We confront narrow, lonely places in our lives, and we find ourselves rudderless in the face of too much space and choice as well. If freedom is our pervading image of Isaac's God place, the unexpected circumstances of life can act as an impenetrable barrier to getting there. Life is full of fields and full of narrow places, times when we have all the choice in the world and times when we have none. What do we do if God is only in the freedom and we inevitably find ourselves enslaved? And what of Jacob's journey? Jacob's God place, a house or a home, may feel unexpected and even simplistic and humble given the majesty of Abraham's mountain or the peace of Isaac's field. And these other two places, the kinds of experiences they represent, are so comprehensive in terms of how many of us describe our spiritual experiences. A house is often majestic, but not always. And a house can be peaceful sometimes, but often it is not. So what is a home? What is a house? What is that image about? Answering these questions becomes even more important when we learn the end of this midrash, this rabbinic legend. The conclusion of the midrash is that while each of the patriarchs describe a place of encounter with God, hamakom, using his own distinct image, and each of the patriarchs has a genuine spiritual moment there, it is Jacob's image that God and our tradition prefer. For the temple in Jerusalem comes to be known as Beit Elohei Yaakov, the house of the God of Jacob. What then is a house? What is a home? What defines it, given that it is so variable and so personal? Is there anything we can say about it universally? What is it about a home that makes it the place of spirituality for Jacob? And where does that leave all of us? Unlike Abraham, who just goes up the mountain when commanded by God, and unlike Isaac, who wanders into a meditative state, Jacob leaves. And leaving can only happen when something one cares about remains behind you. We don't often say we're leaving a mountain or we're leaving a field, but leaving home? Yes, we must all do that sometimes. If Abraham's journey toward the God place is a vertical journey, and Isaac's journey toward the God place is horizontal, Jacob's journey toward the God place is a circle, a trajectory on which every path leads back to the source. Hamakom for Jacob is a home because a home is, whether we like it or not, a place of inevitable return and eternal belonging. Abraham sees God as a commander, strong and imposing as a mountain. Take your son and offer him there. Isaac envisions God as a subtle orchestrator of circumstances, gentle and open like a field. Isaac lifted his eyes, and there was Rebekah. Jacob, whose family has been torn apart and who is feeling completely isolated in life, sees God as a mechanism for repairing broken relationships and reuniting the self with its fractured parts. I will be with you, and I will bring you back home one day. Unlike Abraham and Isaac, who encounter places that are essentially natural and God-made, a mountain and a wide expanse of earth, both of which will be there, whether they return to them or not, Jacob's journey toward God is a journey of self-discovery and teshuvah, a turning, a repairing. Jacob's God place does not exist without him. He must build it by making amends, retracing his steps, reclaiming his role, and this journey will lead him to find the truest part of himself once again. So here we sit. In the modern embodiment of the temple in Jerusalem, it no longer stands, but in its place are synagogues and temples, which are designed to continue its legacy of being the central meeting place for all our spiritual journeys. What is this place? Our place. It is a majestic place with bright colors and high ceilings and beautiful stained glass and a bima to which we must lift our eyes. It is a spacious place with long hallways and quiet corners into which we can lose ourselves. And aside from the incredible and committed visionaries who constructed this building and continue to maintain it, none of us has any control over it, any more than we do a mountain or a field. We cannot make a mountain. And though we can tend to it, we cannot really make a field either. So what can we do? What can we build? What can we make? What structure will be a shelter for us, no matter whether we're on top of the world or in the darkest depths, whether we're untethered and wandering or bound by chains and tubes? Jacob's answer, God's answer, is a home. Our Jewish community, our congregation, each of our individual houses must become a home if they are to be places we encounter God. How do we turn a place into a home? Just any place, into hamakom, the place of encounter with God. We care about each other. We shelter one another from storms and celebrate joys together. We create routines and rituals that hold our lives together when everything falls apart. We laugh and we make memories. We permit one another room to experience that magnetic repulsion and attraction. For home is a place we sometimes desperately need to leave and then long for every moment until we return. We keep the door open, always, remembering that the essential journey of a child of Israel is toward home. The miracle of Judaism is that any place can be Beit El, a house of God, if we choose to make it so. If we think back to those children in the car, traveling a long stretch of road, maybe stopping to enjoy a beautiful vista, and constantly asking, are we there yet? What is the answer? It might be, no, not yet, but let's pull over here for a minute. You'll like this. And that stop will be worthwhile. But at the end of a long day, after a long trip, there is only one satisfying answer to that question. And it is at once ancient and eternal. Are we there yet? Yes, is the answer. Welcome home.